LA Galbi was created by Korean immigrants who moved to LA in the 1970s. It is sweet and tender and also uses a relatively cheap cut of beef, so let's cook this dish up. In terms of ingredients that you probably don't have in your kitchen, you need to go buy a Korean pear and some short ribs from an Asian supermarket so that you can get the short ribs cut in this way. The first step of preparing the meat is to submerge the meat in a pot of cold water. The purpose of this step is to let the bone fragments, blood, and other unwanted particles wash off from the meat. I let the meat submerge for around 30 minutes. It is also important to note that over-submerging the meat will literally disintegrate the meat into a mush, so be careful. While the meat is submerged, get a measuring cup. To the measuring cup, add around 6 ounces of soju, sake, or vodka. Next, add 6 ounces of soy sauce to the measuring cup. Finally, add 6 ounces of water. Now that we have the main liquid components of the marinade prepped, pour the contents into a pot over high heat. The goal here is to boil off the alcohol and rawness of the soy sauce. Next, add a half cup of sugar. I use sugar because I want to showcase the most authentic recipe, but if that's too much sugar, you can balance it out with some honey or even jam. While the pot comes up to a boil, you have to make sure that you're stirring the sugar off the bottom of the pot so it doesn't boil. I found that you don't need to do it the entire time, but you will notice at a certain point that all the sugar is dissolved from the bottom of the pot through your spatula. While the marinade cools, we're now going to give the meat a final wash. If you look carefully, I submerged the meat for a little too long, so it's really soft and pale. So check on your meat often so it doesn't completely turn to mush. Anyways, the goal here is to just run the meat under some water and rub off the leftover bone particles and other impurities that are still on the meat. Once that is done, put it in a strainer or some sort of rack with paper towels so the meat can dry completely. While the meat is drying, we're going to mince up some vegetables. Chop up an onion into chunks so that it can fit in your food processor. Next up, we're cutting the Korean pear. Cut the pear in half since we'll be using only half of the pear. You can enjoy the other half like an apple. Anyways, for the half we are using, peel the skin and take out the core. Once again, chop it into chunks that can fit in your food processor. The purpose of the pear is to tenderize the meat and bring some natural sweetness to the whole dish. Once completed, mince it all down into a paste. To the same pot you submerged your meat, add your minced pear and onion paste. Next up, add a tablespoon of olive oil, some crushed sesame seeds. If you have the kind of grinder I'm using, get ready for a wrist workout. A half tablespoon of ground ginger, your cooled marinade, freshly cracked black pepper, a big tablespoon of minced garlic, and finally some green onions. Once everything is added, give the pot a good stir. Honestly, I think you can skip this step and just put all the meat in a Ziploc bag and pour the marinade over it, but I was told you have to dip each slice of the meat in the marinade individually before moving it into a Ziploc bag. This is probably to ensure all the meat is coated evenly in the marinade, but I'm assuming that if you just dump all the meat in the Ziploc bag and pour the marinade over it, it should be fine. If you have time, I guess do this step. If not, just skip it. Once all the meat is transferred into the Ziploc bag, pour the marinade into the bag. Just pour enough so that the marinade covers all of the meat. Once that is done, close the Ziploc bag so that most of the air is locked out. Then move it into the refrigerator and let it marinate. I would recommend anything from an hour to even the next day. The longer, the better the marinade is taken up. On this day, I was especially hungry, so I think I let it marinate for a little over an hour. To cook this though, you can do it over a grill or an oven. The grill is probably better since it gets all that smoky flavor, but the oven is more convenient, so it's up to you. I'm gonna cook it in the oven since it's a weekday. To a pan that looks like this, add water to the bottom layer so that it somewhat steams in the oven. I believe this is to allow for a more even cooking process as well as prevent the meat from drying out. It will also help with cleanup since it will catch the marinade if it somehow drips. Get some aluminum foil and fold it all the way where there are walls to the side. This wall will prevent the juices and the marinade from dripping all over the place. Lay the meat flat on the foil so that no pieces of meat are overlapping. This will ensure even cooking and color. Next, put the tray in the oven. Turn on the broiler on high and we're good to go. After 40 minutes or so, take out the meat so you can flip it. The timing really depends on your oven, so just keep an eye on it and don't let it burn. When the other side is done, it's good to go. The most popular way is to eat the LA Galbi with some rice and side dishes. But you do you and enjoy. Short ribs are not the most expensive cut of meat, but preparing it like this turns the meat to a very tender, soy saucy, and sweet flavored dish. Would definitely recommend it, and happy eating.